Okay, today we're going to dig into something pretty bold, and honestly, a little alarming. It's a forecast for the U.S. housing market from analyst Melody Wright. She's convinced we're not just in some kind of slowdown, but right at the beginning of a huge multi-year correction. Let's get into it.
And yeah, she doesn't pull any punches. Wright's central argument is that this coming downturn is going to be more severe than the 2008 global financial crisis. That is a massive claim. So what we're going to do here is break down exactly why she thinks that, step by step.
So we'll walk through her whole argument in 5 key parts. We'll start with the cracks that are already starting to show, then look at a really important price signal from builders. After that, we'll tackle that housing shortage myth, expose a ticking time bomb in the mortgage market, and finally, land on why she thinks this could actually be worse than 2008.
All right, first up, what's actually happening in the market right now? And it's not one single story. The country is actually splitting in 2, and some areas are already falling fast.
So what you're seeing right now is what Wright calls a bifurcated market. It's basically splitting apart. The places that had the biggest booms, like parts of Texas and Florida, are now correcting and correcting hard. That weakness is even starting to show up in California. At the same time, yeah, the Midwest and the Northeast are still pretty strong. But here's the kicker. Wright says this won't last. She thinks gravity is finally about to take over, and that's for the whole country.
Okay, let's move on to the second piece of the puzzle. And this one, well, it's a huge signal of what's coming. And you know who's sending it? The home builders themselves. They're basically the canary in the coal mine here.
So to really get how wild the current situation is, you need to know what's normal. And historically, right, a brand new house would cost you about 53 grand more than an existing one. Makes sense, right? New stuff costs more. But today, whoa, the whole thing is flipped on its head. When you actually factor in all the discounts and incentives builders are throwing in, the real price of a new home is a jaw-dropping $80,000 less than an existing one. Think about that. That's not a sale. That's a bright red flashing distress signal telling you exactly where the rest of the market is about to go.
All right, so this brings us to probably the biggest argument you hear against a housing crash, right? This idea that there's just this massive shortage of homes. Well, Wright argues that whole narrative is about to come crashing down, that the inventory dam is about to break.
Yeah, this is the one you hear all the time. How can prices possibly fall if there aren't enough houses to go around? For years, that's been the foundation of the housing can't crash argument. But the data's starting to sing a very, very different tune.
So where is all this new inventory going to come from? Well, according to Wright, it's a perfect storm coming from 4 different directions. First, you got demographics, the baby boomers. They're starting to sell off their second and third homes and eventually their primary ones. Then you've got the big Wall Street investors, the ones who bought up everything. Yeah, they're selling now. Third, that whole Airbnb gold rush, it's turning into a bust, and all those properties are hitting the market. And finally, and this one is super important, you have households literally consolidating.
Yeah, that last point about people moving back in together, that's a really big deal. For the first time in a long time, the average number of people living in a single house is going up. Why? Because it's just too expensive to live alone. And every single time a family or friends move in together, poof, a whole unit of housing demand just disappears from the market.
Okay, now we're getting to what Wright sees as the most dangerous part of this whole situation. The ticking time bomb, really. It's a mortgage market that's been held up with government tape and glue. And this is where the real systemic risk is hiding.
Okay, so here's the deal. A whole bunch of borrowers with FHA loans, the government-backed ones for first-time buyers who don't have a big down payment, they've been in deep, deep trouble since mid-2023. But there's been this incredibly lenient government program that's basically let them skip payments over and over again without any real consequences. It's been papering over the cracks, hiding just how bad things really are.
But here's the thing. That's all about to stop. Starting in October of 2024, the rules are getting way stricter. For one, borrowers will actually have to make 3 trial payments to get help. And they can't just keep doing it over and over. They can only use the program once every 2 years. And this is a big one. If you're behind on your student loans, you're out. You're not eligible anymore. What this does is yank away the support beams that have been holding up a really, really fragile part of the housing market.
So, what happens when you combine that coming wave of new houses for sale with a super fragile mortgage market that's about to lose its government life support? Well, that's where you get the final, sobering outlook.
And look, Wright is crystal clear on this. This is not some quick little dip and recovery. She sees a long, downward grind for at least the next year and a half as all these different forces really take hold. The ball is already rolling downhill.
So when you ask about the key takeaways, or if there are any silver linings, Wright's answer is a pretty clear no. It's the combination of everything we've talked about. A demographic tsunami of supply from boomers hitting the market at the exact same time the most financially vulnerable borrowers, the FHA folks, are losing their safety net. She says it's a perfect storm for a truly historic price correction.
And that really leaves us all with one final and pretty heavy question. If this forecast is even half right, and we're heading for a major housing downturn over the next couple of years, this isn't just going to be numbers on a screen. This is going to have huge, real-world consequences for families, for entire communities, and for the economy. So the real question is, who's going to end up paying the price?